In the summer of 1989, the Callahan family moved into the weather-beaten colonial house at the edge of Ashmere Street, a red-brick relic shaded by gnarled oak trees and wreathed in vines that had crept up its spine like veins over a tired body. They came with Hope and 3-year-old triplets, Eli, Noah, and Grace, who had that unexplainable bond that only multiples seem to carry, finishing one another's sentences and crying in harmony. Their laughter filled the air that first July like fresh paint over the rot of forgotten years. The house had been on the market for decades, unsold, unspoken for. No one told the Callahans what had happened before. No one explained why the basement light flickered even when the switch was off, or why neighborhood kids crossed the street instead of walking past it. But the Callahans weren't the kind to believe in ghosts. The triplets played in the front yard, under the ash tree, building forts of sticks and naming imaginary friends. Grace always spoke of someone she called the quiet boy, who lived behind the wall and only came out when it rained. Noah insisted someone lived in the floorboards. Eli talked to the vents. But toddlers imagine strange things, and their parents chalked it up to creativity, not creeping dread. On the night of October 23, 1989, rain slammed against the windows, wind howled through the fireplace, and the Callahans went to bed with the usual chaos of bedtime stories and warm milk. By morning, the triplets were gone. Their beds untouched. Their room locked from the inside. No broken windows. No footprints. Just silence, and a faint humming that never stopped. The town lost its mind. Posters. Search dogs. Candlelight vigils. Police combed the woods, the lakes, the abandoned barns. Psychics came. Helicopters scanned the fields. But nothing. Not a single sign. Not a scream. Not even a shoe. The house became a shrine to emptiness, and the Callahans slowly unraveled. Within a year, they left, never to return, the front door locked but the porch light still flickering, as if waiting for someone. Over the next 30 years, no one touched it. Realtors refused to list it. Teens dared one another to break in but always stopped at the fence. Stories passed from mouth to mouth, about the triplets' laughter echoing at dusk, about faces in the attic window, about the humming. Always the humming. Then came 2024. A young couple, Dana and Mark, newly married, eager for roots, found the house listed at a government auction. No history. No disclosures. Just a too-good-to-be-true price. They moved in on a Wednesday. By Friday, Dana found a shoebox in the attic filled with yellowed newspaper clippings, the photos of the missing triplets smiling up at her with haunted eyes. She brought it to Mark, who laughed it off, said it was probably a prank, or leftover from the previous owners. But Dana couldn't laugh. She started dreaming of children's voices and shadows that moved when she didn't. One morning, she woke up to crayon drawings on the mirror. A bus. A tree. 3 stick figures. A figure with no face. Mark accused her of doing it in her sleep. She started locking the bathroom door. Then the renovations began. Mark planned to redo the basement, clear out the mold, modernize the wiring. When he tore down the paneling on the east wall, his hammer struck something hollow. Behind the drywall was a second wall, wooden, rotting, sealed with nails. Not a secret room. A barrier. A warning. Mark filmed everything. It was 2024, people filmed their breakfast. He posted the video to Reddit, laughing, calling it "Cursed House Finds," and within hours, the video vanished. His account disappeared. Every copy gone. He thought it was a glitch. Dana thought it was a sign. They waited until morning to open the wall. Inside was a narrow tunnel, sloping downward into darkness, lined with brick that sweat even when the air upstairs was dry. Mark went first, flashlight in hand, his phone recording. The footage shows the first 30 feet, dripping walls, drawings scratched into the stone, the sound of footsteps that didn't belong to him. Then static. When he came back up, he didn't speak. His eyes were glass. His hands trembled. That night, he left. Just left. No note. No goodbye. Dana never saw him again. She called the police, who told her to wait. She called his parents, who hadn't heard from him. A week passed. Then two. She started hearing things again. Whispers in the vents. Laughter behind the closet door. Drawings appeared again. This time in the basement. This time signed. Noah. Eli. Grace. Her hands shook when she touched the wall. Not fear. Recognition. Desperate, Dana reached out to a podcast she'd once listened to about unsolved mysteries, urban legends, forgotten crimes. The host, Claire, responded instantly. 2 days later, she arrived with her gear, her instinct sharp from the Morning Lake case, her eyes already reading the walls like a language. Together, they descended the tunnel. This time, they didn't make it to the bottom. Halfway down, the air turned heavy, metallic. The light flickered. The humming returned, louder, almost melodic. They turned back. That night, the house trembled. Dana's photos deleted themselves. Claire's audio corrupted. In the attic, something moved. Dana fled. Claire stayed. By morning, she had found a hidden hatch beneath the stairs. Inside, dozens of items catalogued like museum artifacts. A child's shoe. A hairbrush. A torn blanket. A file folder labeled BCR Triplet Observation. She opened it. Inside were medical records, intake forms, session logs, photos. And at the bottom, a typed note, subject response to loop destabilizing. Recommending sight seal and auditory suppression. The names, Grace, Eli, Noah, each one labeled cycle terminated. Claire scanned everything, uploaded backups to 5 locations. But the moment she tried to leave, the front door wouldn't open, not stuck, not locked, gone. She climbed out through the basement window, shoes soaked in mud. She never went back. That same week, Dana disappeared. Her car was found on the side of the road. Her apartment, empty. Her name was scrubbed from the property records. Her digital presence dissolved. Like she'd never existed. But Claire had the files. The evidence. The dates. The signs. She knew the house wasn't just haunted, it was built for something. A test. An experiment in sensory looping and childhood dissociation. A psychological maze beneath floorboards. The tunnel wasn't natural, it had angles too sharp, walls too uniform. Someone had built it. Funded it. Used it. And sealed it. But why triplets? Why them? She traced the funding to a shell company registered in 1988, Redwood Integrative Learning, based out of a defunct mental health facility. She found a name, Dr. Eleanor Frey. Psychologist. Specialist in early cognition and trauma. Deceased in 1991. But her signature appeared on the Callahan files, which meant someone else had continued the work. Someone else was watching. Behind the wall wasn't just rot, it was architecture. Not decay, design. The triplets weren't kidnapped. They were activated. And whatever happened in 1989 hadn't stopped. It had just gone silent. The files Claire recovered from the Ashmere house weren't just records, they were a confession buried in bureaucracy, an anatomy of control carved into medical jargon and grayscale photographs. The triplets hadn't just vanished into some unspeakable fate, they had been categorized, monitored, reduced to case numbers and behavioral anomalies. The file labeled Session 7, GC, showed Grace, hair disheveled, eyes red, refusing to speak. A note in the margin read, auditory hallucinations persistent. Refers to the static place. Further observation warranted. But the most damning piece wasn't a file, it was a drawing, found pressed between 2 sheets of carbon paper. Crayon on lined paper. 3 children standing beneath a crooked tree, behind them a wall, behind the wall a bus with black windows, and behind the bus, nothing. Just a wide mouth, drawn in thick, dark swirls. The initials GC in the corner. Grace Callahan. Claire stared at it for hours that night in the motel, the TV playing white noise she hadn't noticed she'd left on, as if her mind needed the static to understand what had been done. She made copies, triple backups, printed 2 and mailed 1 to an old friend in Vermont, Elias Boone, who had already been watching her inbox for weeks after the Morning Lake revelations. His reply came fast: "This connects. Same funding structure. Same symbols. Same loop theory. Loop theory." It kept repeating. In the notes. In the testimony. In the architecture. These children hadn't disappeared. They'd been placed into something, a system, and tested. For what? For how long? And why was no one stopping it? That's when Claire found the tunnel blueprints, not in government records, but in a scanned microfiche posted by a Cold War infrastructure enthusiast on a forgotten message board. It was an emergency continuity shelter design, dated 1961, modified in 1987. The location matched Ashmere. The funding matched Redwood Integrative. A final annotation read, "Repurposed for cognitive field testing, no further structural changes permitted after SEAL Phase 1. Claire didn't sleep that night. She mapped out the tunnel entrance beneath the Ashmere house, overlaid it with street-level scans and foundation layouts. The numbers didn't lie, there were more tunnels. More entrances. And based on session dates and proximity, there had been at least 3 sites, Ashmere, Bell Creek, and a third unmarked one labeled only as S3 Hollow Chamber. That's where the files stopped. Redacted. But Claire knew what she was looking at now. It was a loop not just in time, but in space. Children entered the program, underwent exposure to extreme sensory isolation, psychological misdirection, manipulated time perception, and environmental looping until their cognition broke or adapted. The survivors were released. The rest were recycled. That word echoed in several reports. Recycled. And next to each occurrence, 3 names. Over and over. Eli. Noah. Grace. Over and over. Like an incantation. Like they weren't people anymore, but parts of a test. The local library near Bell Creek had old records from a shuttered field camp that matched the Redwood address on the files. Claire drove 7 hours overnight, arriving just as the fog began to break over the hills. The clerk barely glanced at her ID, and after 2 hours of digging through microfilm, she found it. A staff log dated June 1989, staff name, D. Lambert, function, field monitor, camp code, BC-017, notes, loop trials scheduled for July, triplets arrived, parents unaware, monitoring response to multi-subject synchrony. And there it was again, loop, triplets, synchrony. Claire's heart stuttered, this wasn't isolated, it wasn't random, it was coordinated. Synchronized subjects, tested for dissociative resilience under imposed repetition and sensory displacement. A field monitor's log scribbled, subject E, C, recognized the reset, informed subject G, C, resulted in collapse, recalibrate. These weren't experiments, they were rehearsals, for something bigger. Claire scanned the documents and got back into her car, but as she started the engine, her GPS lit up with an alert, new device paired. She froze, she hadn't connected anything. A second later, a message popped up on the dash display, no number, just text, go to the wall. Claire looked around, empty parking lot, no cars, no movement, just wind. She took a breath and whispered out loud, which wall? Another message followed, the one they never opened. That night, she drove back to Ashmere, broke in through the back. The house was cold, abandoned, but the tunnel was still there. And this time, she wasn't filming. She followed the path deeper than before, past the first bend, past the humming, past the drawings, she counted her steps, 72. Then, the wall. Brick, solid, but not reinforced. Her flashlight caught a glint in the mortar, something metallic. A latch. She pulled, it groaned open like it hadn't been touched in decades. Beyond it, a chamber stretched out, wide and circular, walls lined with mirrors angled just slightly off true. In the center, a structure, half classroom, half hospital ward, bunk beds, desks, charts. On the wall, a map with pushpins, each one marked a school, a name, a date, most from the 80s and 90s. Then Claire saw it. A film reel. She threaded it through an old projector on instinct, clicked the switch, the bulb hummed, the screen flared, and there they were, the triplets, on tape, sitting in a circle, a man's voice asking them questions. What did you see beyond the door? Grace said, I saw the trees move backwards. Noah said, the bus isn't real, and Eli said, you're not real. Then the film cut to black, a single frame flashed, redacted, then more voices followed, a doctor saying, terminate subject set B, sequence incomplete, start next iteration. Claire stumbled back as the projector sputtered and the reel snapped. She backed out fast, heart thundering, but before she could reach the first bend again, a sound stopped her, footsteps, small and bare, and a child's whisper, you saw us. Claire spun, flashlight shaking, but nothing was there, only a single drawing pinned to the wall in fresh ink, showing a door, a circle, 3 figures, and the words, we never left. Just looped. Back at her motel, Claire transferred everything to a secure drive, tried calling Elias but his number rang once then disconnected, and her inbox showed a single unread message from a scrambled address with the subject line, you're not the first, and inside were coordinates and a note, S3 hollow chamber active again. Grace sent you, and Claire's blood turned to ice because no one should know that name, not now, not this way, so she packed her bag in silence, no light, no noise, and kept the USB drive taped to her ankle, then texted a single message to Elias just in case, if I don't check in by 3 a.m., go public, before driving toward the coordinates through backroads, through fog, through forest, until the road ran out and a rusted sign, half buried in dirt, read, property of Redwood Integrative, authorized. Access only, where she parked and waited, and then, from behind a curtain of trees, a light flickered once, then twice. Claire stepped into the dark, the forest quiet around her, but the air still carried the faint, unmistakable sound of children laughing. Not joyfully. Not loudly. Just enough to remind her they were still down there. Waiting, she stepped toward the flickering light, branches brushing her shoulders like cold fingers, the soil soft under her boots, each step deeper into something she could feel more than see, and when she reached the clearing it was empty except for a low concrete structure half sunk into the earth like a forgotten bunker, no windows, no signs, just a metal door slightly ajar and covered in moss, and on the ground before it, etched crudely into the concrete, were 3 initials side by side. EC, GC, NC, and Claire knelt there, brushing away the debris with her sleeve, heart hammering at the thought that the triplets had stood here once too, maybe even made this mark themselves, some desperate attempt to say we were here. Then she slipped inside the doorway where cold air wrapped around her legs like mist and her flashlight cut a narrow path into the dark, illuminating tiled walls cracked from time and a narrow corridor leading downward, and as she descended, a hum grew in the walls, mechanical and low, pulsing like a second heartbeat, guiding her deeper until she reached the first chamber, where rusted beds lined the walls and clipboards still hung from rails, and she moved slowly, scanning everything, whispering notes into her recorder. August 4th, 2:17 a.m., Chamber 1, 6 beds, restraints on each, drawings on the wall, same style, same hand, loop symbols, figure with black eyes. Then the flashlight flickered and steadied again, and in that brief dark moment, she thought she heard a breath, not hers, not echo, just a quiet exhale from behind the observation glass, but when she turned, there was only dust and a smudged handprint on the inside, too small to be an adult's, and she moved on, reaching another sealed door marked Sequence 2, Subject Interface Only, and it opened with a long hiss, revealing a spiral hallway sloping downward, the walls lined with speakers and mirrored panels that warped her reflection like water, and her voice wavered. As she kept recording, this place was built to disorient, maybe even to erase, and just as she said it, the lights changed, no longer flickering but pulsing in rhythm, low red glows that breathed like lungs, and she stepped carefully down the spiral, each footstep sounding like it belonged to someone else, until the hallway opened into a vast underground auditorium where a school bus sat, perfectly preserved. Headlights on, though there was no engine noise, no smell of fuel, and as Claire stepped closer, her throat tightened because this was it, this was the original loop, the bus where the sessions had started, and through the fogged window she could see shapes moving inside, children or echoes or something else altogether, and she whispered, "If you're still here, I see you," before stepping aboard, the door creaking open with a sound that scraped against her spine, and inside, the air felt thick like syrup, each breath slow and sticky. The seats labeled with tags, Grace, Eli, Noah, and beneath them, paper journals tied with string, drawings and scribbled notes repeating one phrase, "It ends when someone stays," over and over like they had been practicing for someone who would finally come all the way in, not just to observe, but to finish it, and Claire's hands shook as she untied one notebook. Flipping through pages soaked with water and something darker, something old, and the last page had a note scrawled fast, "They left the door open too long, now it doesn't close," and she looked up and saw her own reflection in the mirror mounted above the driver's seat, but it wasn't her, it was herself staring back with black eyes and a static grin, and she stumbled backward off the bus, falling hard against the chamber floor, scraping her palms but too shaken to care, because something had shifted in that moment, some veil lifted, and she understood that the loop wasn't just a psychological construct, it was physical, woven into this place like a mechanism, like a living thing, and it had noticed her, and as she got up, breath trembling, she felt the space begin to hum again, faster, louder, like the chamber itself was reacting to her presence, and she knew she had to leave now or stay forever, so she turned, running back through the spiral, past the mirrors where her reflection didn't follow, past the rooms where shadows stood still, listening, past the handprint that was now gone from the glass, and into the corridor where her flashlight began to die, stuttering light in long slow gasps, and just as she reached the exit, she saw something new, a doorway that hadn't been opened before, marked, "Final Observation, Set B Termination Review," and her hand moved before her mind did, pulling it open to reveal a room lined with videotapes, hundreds of them, each labeled with dates and 3 sets of initials, all running between 1987 and 1994, and she grabbed as many as she could carry, stuffing them into her bag, heart pounding in her ears, then ran the last leg of the hallway and burst out into the cold. Falling onto the grass, gasping like she hadn't breathed in hours, the sky just beginning to hint at dawn, the world eerily still, and her car, thankfully, untouched, though her phone showed a missed call with no number and a single message waiting, "You stayed, so it sees you now," and before she could open it, a black sedan rolled to a stop a few yards down the trail, its engine silent, windows too dark to see through, and Claire didn't wait. She jumped into her car, gunned the engine, and peeled off the shoulder, tires flinging gravel behind her as she flew down the forest road toward the highway, eyes darting to the rear view where the black car didn't follow, just sat there like a threat that didn't need to move, and she drove straight to the edge of town, into the industrial quarter, where Elias had set up a drop zone months ago, a dead mailbox in a condemned warehouse, where she stuffed one of the tapes and a drive of her audio notes into an envelope marked with his backup address, and as she left, she finally opened the message on her phone, her hands trembling, and read, "We remember you, Claire, you found the wall, now find the one who built it," and the screen went black, unresponsive, battery full but no sign of life, like it too had been looped out of this reality, and Claire whispered to herself in the empty car, "One more, because this wasn't over, not yet." And whatever they had started in 1989, she was going to finish in 2024, and if you're listening to this, if any part of this story made you stop scrolling, hold your breath, or check over your shoulder, then know this isn't just a tale, it's a map, and Claire left the trail wide open for the next one brave enough to follow, so if you want to hear the rest, the part that comes after the chamber and before the erasure, then like this video, subscribe for part 4, and leave a comment below so we know you're still with us. Because sometimes the only way out is to be seen. Make sure to subscribe. Like this video. She didn't go home, not really, not in the way normal people do after unearthing something buried, something meant to stay quiet, because there was no version of home that felt safe anymore, not after seeing the triplets' names etched in stone, not after reading that message on her phone, not after the projector room and the drawing pinned to the wall still fresh with ink, so she drove 2 towns over. Slept 3 hours in the parking lot of a closed library with one hand on her satchel and the other under her coat, then at sunrise walked into a diner like everything was fine, ordered coffee and toast she barely touched, and began sorting through the tapes she'd grabbed from the chamber, all unlabeled except one that read, B7V, and when she slid it into the portable player, the screen jumped to life with footage not from 1989 but from what looked like months ago. A surveillance recording of the underground chamber's bus room, exact same setup, exact same structure, but something was different, not just the grain or the lighting, but the people, adults, moving with surgical masks and clipboards, reviewing notes, adjusting lights, while 3 children sat in the front row of the bus, none older than 12, dressed in the same uniforms she'd seen in old photos of the Redwood integration program, and one of them looked straight at the camera, like he knew she'd be watching someday, and mouthed 2 words, "Help us," before the video cut to static and then, disturbingly, to another file labeled Retry Session B7, Final, which played a flickering burst of light, a screaming hum, and then silence, then the same hallway where Claire had just been walking days ago, now lined with body bags, all child-sized, stacked along the walls, a red stamp across the screen that read, "Inconclusive, loop retained," and she slammed the player shut, bile rising, heart racing, realizing whatever they'd been doing in 1989 hadn't ended, hadn't paused, had only evolved, and that the triplets weren't just victims of an old experiment, they were the template, and that made Claire's next step urgent, because if there was a template, then there were others who came after, and maybe still were, so she traced the file code, B7, back through old facility blueprints until she found it. Site B7 wasn't in the main Redwood tunnel system, it was off-grid, deeper west, near a retired fire tower that hadn't been manned since 1991, and she marked the location, packed her bag again, left cash for the coffee, and hit the road before the waitress had even noticed she was crying, driving west for hours through logging roads and fog, past the towns that had shuttered their schools and the neighborhoods where no one left their porch lights on, until she reached the edge of the tree line where the map said the tower used to stand, only there was no tower anymore, just a ring of cement pylons and a rusted hatch partially concealed under a pile of broken branches, and when she opened it, the air that escaped was warm, metallic, like the breath of something living, something sleeping too long, and she whispered into her recorder, entering Site B7, Redwood Integrative, August 5, 3:48 p.m., then lowered herself in slowly, descending rungs of a steel ladder that seemed to stretch down forever until it hit stone, and the chamber she found at the bottom was different than the others, not tiled or clinical, but carved directly from the earth, natural rock and dirt walls reinforced with old scaffolding and cables, and it was quiet, so quiet her own breath sounded intrusive, and she moved carefully, flashlight low, passing signs that had once glowed, sequence entry point, subject prep, transition hall, each more decayed than the last, until she reached a curved hallway sloping down like a drainpipe, lined with mirrors that were cracked and warped, each one showing her face, only not quite. In one she had a cut above her eyebrow, in another her eyes were blacked out like the drawing, in another she was screaming but silent, and she realized this wasn't just a hall, it was part of the loop mechanism. A place where perception fractured, a place where subjects were broken down and reassembled, and that's when she saw it, carved into the baseboard in a child's handwriting, scrawled over and over again, "Let us out. Let us out. Let us out," until the words became scratches, then claw marks, then blood, and Claire turned away fast, heart hammering, slipping through the next door marked B7 Recursion Lab and into the heart of the site, where old CRT monitors blinked on despite no power, displaying looping footage of 3 children playing hopscotch in slow motion, faces blurred, their laughter distorted like a broken music box, and beside the screens, a wall of notes, clinical handwriting, some signed R1 Slow, some E. Thatcher, and one unmistakably signed by E. C. Initial test subject, and that's when it hit her like a punch. Eli Seed, Eli Carter, the third triplet, had written this, not as a victim, but as a participant, or worse, an insider, and she traced his notes, reading fast, realizing he hadn't just been caught in the loop, he'd begun to understand it, manipulating variables, watching others enter and fail again, learning which memories stuck, which ones could be altered, and how to overwrite the mind like tape, and one final note sat beneath all the others, smeared but readable: "Claire, if you found this, then you already opened the door too far, and I'm sorry, I didn't want it to find you," and she dropped the note, backing away as a siren began to wail, low at first, then higher, until the walls shook and the floor began to hum, and the lights flickered as an automated voice played overhead, sequence unstable. Reset in progress. All observers evacuate, but she didn't know the way back, not in this version of the layout, not with the lights dancing like flame, so she ran blindly through hallways now unfamiliar, until she hit a stairwell, climbed it, and burst through a door not to daylight but to another chamber, smaller, darker, where 3 chairs sat in a circle and a camera mounted in the corner clicked on by itself. And the screen ahead lit up showing her own face from minutes ago, walking down the mirror hall. Again and again, looped, and Claire realized she hadn't escaped B7, she'd entered a recursion chamber, just another version of the same trap, and as the lights dimmed she heard it, a voice she hadn't heard in years, her brother's, whispering, "Don't forget me," and then Eli's voice, older, saying, "This place doesn't forget, it just rewrites," and the tape reels began to spin again behind the wall, playing sounds from her own childhood, sounds no one could have recorded, and she curled against the far wall, holding the USB drive close, whispering to herself, "This isn't real, but it was, and you know it is, too, because this is the part of the story where no one is supposed to follow, but you already have, and now you know, Redwood wasn't a camp, it was a mechanism, and the triplets weren't just lost, they were marked, and if you want to know what happens next, then like this video, subscribe for part 5, and leave a comment to show you're still listening, because they are, and they remember every name, especially yours. Make sure to subscribe, like this video. She didn't scream, not at first, because screaming would have meant it was real, meant that the voices weren't just in her head, meant that the tape reels spinning behind the wall were recording her now, capturing every breath like they had the others, and instead she moved slowly, pressing her back against the cold stone, blinking fast to fight the nausea creeping in as the floor beneath her seemed to pulse like it had a heartbeat, and then, through the flickering light, she saw it, across the chamber, just past the old projector, another door, half open, flickering light behind it like candlelight or fire, and her legs moved before she knew what was happening, pushing her toward it, stepping over a half-burned notebook on the ground that bore the initials GT, Grace Thorne, and she remembered the photo on the motel wall of the 3 triplets in matching jackets, remembered how the doctor in the film had said, "Sequence incomplete," and now she knew why, because Grace had escaped, because the system wasn't finished without her, and something in the building knew it, wanted it closed, the loop tied off, and now it had her instead, Claire, standing where Grace once had, trembling hands pushing open the door into a room that smelled of burned plastic and soil, where a chair sat in the middle surrounded by screens, all playing different timelines, different versions of what could have happened. One screen showed Grace older, working in a bookstore, another showed Eli in a hospital bed scribbling into a journal, another showed Claire herself, but younger, alone in a room with a voice whispering through a speaker. "Do you remember the door?" And she staggered backward, overwhelmed, bumping into a shelf that collapsed, spilling labeled VHS tapes like dominoes, each labeled with dates and names, some she recognized, some she didn't, and one rolled right to her foot labeled, Claire West, Sequence 2B, and she picked it up with shaking fingers, heart pounding, knowing she'd never filmed this, never sat in any room for them, but they had it, had a version of her that did, and she backed out of the room with the tape clutched in her hand, past the chair, past the screens, back into the recursion chamber where the projector flickered again and played a loop of the 3 triplets in a forest clearing, sitting in a circle, chanting in unison, "We never left. We never left. We never left," and Claire's breath broke as she turned and ran hard, retracing her steps through the stairwell, down the mirrored corridor now filled with fog, each reflection warped to show not her face but someone else's, screaming silently, reaching out, until the final door came into view, marked with a symbol, a circle with 3 lines, and she shoved it open, breaking into a long concrete hallway that sloped upward into the dark, the air thick and wet, the sound of water dripping, echoing like footsteps, and then ahead of her, light, a pale square growing brighter as she ran, and she burst out of the tunnel mouth onto a forest hillside, gasping, drenched in sweat, as the hatch behind her began to groan closed by itself, the metal arms retracting like a vault, sealing the sight once again, and she didn't wait, just stumbled back to her car, where the GPS had stopped blinking and the second phone had recorded every coordinate, every time stamp, and she uploaded it all fast. Tapes, audio, photos, the sequence of names carved into the wall of the chamber, including one she hadn't seen before, etched smaller, later, near the bottom, Claire West. Observer Loop 3, and she felt her heart cave in because they hadn't just been watching her, they'd written her into the sequence, folded her in like code, and if she hadn't left just then, maybe the system would have kept her, absorbed her, overwritten her the way it had done to Eli, to Noah, to whoever had sent her that drawing at the motel, and now she understood why the triplets had vanished, not because they were taken, but because they were the first to find the mechanism, the loop, and someone, something, had made sure they never returned, because return would have broken the cycle, exposed the pattern, but now Claire had the proof, now the files were sent, the drives duplicated and uploaded to Elias and another backup server she'd paid for anonymously weeks earlier, and all that was left was to speak it out loud, to say the truth and make it echo, to testify, so she drove straight to the city, no stops, no sleep, parked in a garage beneath a university library and walked in. Through the side entrance carrying only her bag and her phone, where Elias waited, pale, stunned, holding a printout of the floor plans she'd sent him, his voice hushed as he said, "They buried the chamber beneath a fire tower, Claire. That was public land." They knew no one would check, and she nodded, said nothing, just placed the tape labeled Sequence 2B in his hand, watched him swallow hard and whisper, "What the hell did they do to you?" And she just said, "Finish it," and walked away, out into the dark street, where no one noticed her pass, no one saw her blend into the crowd, and maybe that was how it was meant to be, because she had pulled the thread, had followed it into the pit, and now someone else had to carry it forward, because she'd seen enough to know this wasn't just about 3 missing children. Make sure to subscribe, like this video. Elias didn't sleep after she left, couldn't, not with the tape in his hand and the word sequence ringing in his head like a low battery alarm from somewhere inside his bones, so he locked himself in his study, pulled down the blackout shades, set the recorder rolling, and pushed the tape into the deck, a soft click, then whirring, then a flickering image blooming on screen, Claire, younger, but not a child, seated in what looked like an observation room, eyes unfocused, speaking in broken phrases. They never took the bus, the road just changed, and every mirror here shows what they remember, not what happened. Then a voice off screen, male, older, asking, "Claire, are you aware you're in session 3B, and her answering, "I told you, this isn't the first time I've said this," and the tape fast-forwarded suddenly on its own, stuttering across years of static before landing on a room lit only by a red bulb, where the triplets stood again, this time older than the last footage, but still too young for what they'd seen, their mouths moving in silence as another voice, not a doctor's, not human, layered over them with unnatural pitch and cadence, set B collapsing, boundaries weakening, iteration bleed, and Elias reached for the stop button but his finger froze an inch above it because something was wrong. The screen was bleeding light, real light, soft and red like a wound opening in the fabric of the wall, and for a single second, he saw himself in the corner of the frame, his face, his own face, staring back through the flickering film with eyes that didn't blink, and he recoiled, hit stop, yanked the tape out and threw it across the room where it hit the bookshelf and dropped, humming slightly like something alive, and he realized then what Claire had meant, that the recordings weren't just archives. They were doors, openings, thresholds that pulled memory into matter and back again, and she'd known it, had gone into the loop willingly, hoping someone would close it behind her, someone who'd believe enough to carry the rest, and he didn't know if he was strong enough but he had the data, he had the drive, and more importantly, he had time, at least a little, before the next reset, before the window closed again. So he uploaded everything to 3 servers, encrypted with separate keys, and sent them to journalists, universities, archivists with long histories of chasing buried truths, and when he was done, he sat back, breathing shallow, heart pounding, until a soft knock came from his front door, and his chest went cold because it was 3:13 a.m. and no one knew he was here, but he opened the door anyway, slowly, and there, on the porch, sat a small box wrapped in brown paper with a single label written in slanted childlike handwriting, "For Elias, from Claire," and inside, a drawing, the bus again, but this time the doors were open, and 3 figures stood at the threshold, looking out, not trapped anymore, and in the corner, another figure had been drawn, scribbled fast in black ink, tall, watching, with the caption, "It followed them home," and he understood, truly now, that the story wasn't over, that loops didn't end, they frayed, unraveled at the edges and then began again from somewhere else. With someone new, someone unaware, someone curious, and maybe that. Someone was watching this right now, hearing the words echo in your ear, wondering if your attic creaks in odd rhythms, if your mirror sometimes doesn't show your movement in real time. If a photo in your childhood album looks just slightly off, like a memory remembered wrong by someone who never lived it, and if any of that feels too close, too familiar, don't look away, because the loop doesn't want you to forget, it wants you to find it, to walk through it, to finish what Claire started, and if you think you're safe because it's just a story, just a video, just another internet rabbit hole, then answer this. When was the last time you checked behind your walls, really checked? Or watched your childhood home in silence and felt something watching back, because Redwood was just the beginning, and the triplets were just the test, and the system that built them is still hungry, still humming beneath towns like yours, waiting for the next name, the next door, the next loop to open, and if you're ready to see what they saw, what she saw, then like this video, subscribe before this story is sealed again, and comment. I remember, if you've ever heard the hum too, if you've ever dreamed of a forest, a bus that never stopped, and the door at the end of the hallway that you've never opened, not yet. Make sure to subscribe, like this video.